Throughout its history, the United States has witnessed episodes in which those in power have inflicted profound cruelty on vulnerable populations, driven by ideologies of racial, political, or national superiority, or justified by national security and scientific prerogatives. Examining these dark moments reveals not only the depths of human suffering wrought by state authority, but also the resilience of those who resisted and the reforms born of public outrage. Britannica.com. 1. The Trail of Tears, 1830s. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 authorized the forcible displacement of southeastern tribes, including the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, to lands west of the Mississippi. In the harsh winter marches that followed, an estimated 4,000 Cherokees alone perished from exposure, disease, and starvation. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Congress and President Andrew Jackson invoked federal authority to abrogate existing treaties and override tribal sovereignty. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Military escorts neglected the needs of the displaced. Families were driven on foot hundreds of miles with minimal provisions, resulting in thousands of deaths. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. The removal decimated indigenous cultures and set a precedent for further displacement, yet it also galvanized native resistance and later legal challenges affirming tribal rights. 2. Chattel slavery in the Civil War, 1619–1865. For nearly 250 years, Africans and their descendants were treated as property, enduring family separations, brutal labor regimes, and physical violence. Britannica.com. The Civil War, 1861–1865, arose from this system. Its conclusion and the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but left enduring inequalities. Britannica.com. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Slaveholders wielded legal authority to own and control human beings, with courts upholding slavery as a constitutional right until 1865. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Enslaved people faced whippings, sexual exploitation, and sale at auction, tactics designed to terrorize and dehumanize. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Emancipation legally ended slavery, but gave rise to black codes, sharecropping, and persistent racial hierarchies that segued into Jim Crow segregation. Reconstruction's collapse in Jim Crow, 1877–1965. After the Civil War, Reconstruction governments extended civil rights to formerly enslaved people. By 1877, federal troops withdrew, enabling southern states to enact Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation and disenfranchisement. Exercise of power. State legislatures codified separate but equal doctrines and deployed poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses to suppress black voting. Cruelty in practice. Lynchings and racially motivated violence were tolerated by local authorities. Public facilities for black Americans were systematically underfunded and neglected. Aftermath and legacy. The civil rights movement of the 1950s to 60s dismantled legal segregation, but the socioeconomic scars of Jim Crow endure in educational and wealth gaps. 4. Sand Creek Massacre, 1864. On November 29, 1864, Colorado militia under Colonel John M. Shivington attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment, killing an estimated 150 to 500 Native Americans, mostly women, children, and the elderly. Exercise of power. Territorial authorities labeled the tribes hostile, granting militias carte blanche to attack noncombatants. Cruelty in practice. Soldiers mutilated bodies, scalped victims, and celebrated the slaughter as a military triumph. Aftermath and legacy. Congressional investigations condemned the massacre, but no participants were punished. The atrocity deepened mistrust and fueled ongoing Plains Wars. 5. Wounded Knee Massacre, 1890. On December 29, 1890, U.S. troops opened fire on a band of Lakota Sioux at Wounded Knee Creek, killing 150 to 300 men, women, and children, effectively crushing the Ghost Dance movement. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. The Army enforced disarmament orders and interpreted Native religious gatherings as insurrection, authorizing lethal force. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Soldiers used Hotchkiss guns and rifles on fleeing noncombatants. Many were shot in the back as they tried to escape. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. The massacre marked the end of large-scale Native resistance in the Plains. it remains a symbol of cultural genocide and is commemorated in Lakota oral histories. Number 6. Native American boarding schools, 19th to 20th centuries. From the 1870s through the 1960s, the federal government and Christian missions operated boarding schools aimed at civilizing Native children by eradicating their languages and traditions. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Congress funded compulsory assimilation programs under the premise of education, removing children from families by law or coercion. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Children suffered physical abuse, neglect, malnutrition, and were punished for speaking their native languages. Death rates were high due to disease and harsh conditions. Kids.Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Survivors report intergenerational trauma. Recent federal initiatives seek truth, healing, and preservation of indigenous languages and cultures. 7. Chinese exclusion and anti-Chinese violence, 1882 to 1885. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred Chinese laborers from immigrating, a first in U.S. law targeting a specific nationality. Britannica.com. In 1885, white miners attacked Chinese workers in the Rock Springs Massacre, killing at least 28 and driving hundreds from town. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Congress enacted exclusion based on racial and economic fears. Local authorities often turned a blind eye to violence against Chinese residents. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Rioters burned homes, forced victims onto cattle cars, and left bodies in unmarked graves. Survivors faced legal indifference. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Exclusion laws persisted until 1943. Anti-Asian discrimination resurfaced during Bubble Boom II and again in recent decades, prompting civil rights advocacy. Number 8. Wilmington Coup and Massacre, 1898. On November 10, 1898, white supremacists overthrew Wilmington, North Carolina's multiracial government, murdering up to 60 black citizens and displacing thousands. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Organized white mobs, backed by Democratic Party leaders, used violence to usurp municipal authority and intimidate black voters. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Gunmen burned the black-owned Daily Record newspaper, shot residents in the streets, and drove families from their homes under threat of death. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. The insurrection ended Reconstruction-era gains in North Carolina. It remained largely unacknowledged until recent state-led truth commissions. Number 9. Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921. From May 31 to June 1, 1921, a white mob attacked Greenwood, Tulsa, a prosperous black neighborhood known as Black Wall Street, killing an estimated 100 to 300 residents and destroying over 1,200 homes. Exercise of power. Local officials deputized white rioters and refused to protect black citizens, enabling widespread arson and looting. Cruelty in practice. Aircraft dropped incendiaries, and police arrested black survivors while turning a blind eye to white violence. Aftermath and legacy. Survivors were denied insurance payouts and federal assistance. The massacre was omitted from history curricula until recent legislative efforts spurred memorialization. 10. Forced sterilization and eugenics. Buck v. Bell, 1927. In Buck v. Bell, the Supreme Court upheld Virginia's law permitting compulsory sterilization of the unfit, legitimizing eugenic policies that led to over 60,000 involuntary sterilizations nationwide. Wikipedia.org. Exercise of power. State legislatures enacted sterilization statutes rooted in the pseudoscience of eugenics, disproportionately targeting the intellectually disabled and the poor. Wikipedia.org. Cruelty in practice. Individuals were sterilized without informed consent. Carrie Buck and others suffered permanent bodily harm under the guise of public health. Wikipedia.org. Aftermath and legacy. Buck v. Bell was never formally overturned. Its legacy influenced Nazi Germany's sterilization laws and continues to shape debates on reproductive rights. 11. Japanese-American internment, 1942 to 1945. Authorized by Executive Order 9066, the U.S. forcibly relocated some 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 U.S. citizens, to remote camps, stripping them of property and civil liberties. KidsBritannica.com. Exercise of power. The executive branch, with military backing, suspended habeas corpus for an entire ethnic group under military necessity. Kidsbritannica.com. Cruelty in practice, families were given days to liquidate assets. Camps lacked adequate shelter, healthcare, and education. Many lost farms and businesses permanently. Kids.britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. In 1988, Congress authorized reparations and an apology through the Civil Liberties Act, acknowledging the injustice and racial prejudice at its core. 12. Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, 1932 to 1972. From 1932 until 1972, the Public Health Service studied untreated syphilis in black men without their informed consent and withheld penicillin long after it became the standard cure. Britannica.com. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Government researchers exploited racialized beliefs to justify deceiving and studying a vulnerable population without ethical safeguards. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Subjects were lied to about bad blood, denied treatment, and suffered severe health consequences. Infections spread to families. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Public outrage led to ethical reforms, mandatory informed consent and institutional review boards, and a formal presidential apology in 1997. 13. COINTELPRO and political repression, 1956 to 1971. The FBI's counterintelligence program targeted civil rights leaders, black nationalists, socialist groups, and anti-war activists through surveillance, infiltration, and disruption. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI operated extra-legally, bypassing judicial oversight to monitor and neutralize political dissidents. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Agents spread false rumors, incited infighting, and in some cases colluded in violence, as seen in the murder of Black Panther leader Fred Hampton. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. COINTELPRO's exposure by the Church Committee prompted reforms limiting domestic spying. Debates over surveillance persist. 14. My Lai Massacre, 1968. On March 16, 1968, U.S. soldiers killed between 347 and 504 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, mostly women, children, and elders, in the South Vietnamese village of My Lai. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Military command failures and dehumanizing combat directives enabled troops to view civilians as the enemy. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Victims were shot, bayoneted, and assaulted. Photographs documented atrocity scenes. Attempts were made to conceal the massacre. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Public revelation fueled anti-war sentiment. Lieutenant William Calley's limited prosecution underscored the military's reluctance to hold leadership accountable. 15. MKUltra and CIA mind control experiments, 1953 and 1973. Project MKUltra conducted covert, non-consensual experiments using LSD, electroshock, and sensory deprivation on unwitting U.S. and Canadian subjects. Ian.wikipedia.org. Exercise of power. The CIA exploited national security prerogatives to override medical ethics and conduct unsupervised human experimentation. Ian.wikipedia.org. Cruelty in practice. Subjects endured psychosis, memory loss, and lasting trauma without debriefing or consent. Records were destroyed to conceal wrongdoing. N.wikipedia.org. Aftermath and legacy. Congressional investigations, Church and Rockefeller committees led to executive orders requiring informed consent. MKUltra remains a cautionary tale of unchecked intelligence power. 16. Post-9/11 repression. Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, 2002 to 2009. In the War on Terror, detainees were subjected to torture, sexual humiliation, and indefinite detention without trial at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. Britannica.com. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. The executive branch asserted broad, enemy combatant authority, bypassing Geneva Conventions and habeas corpus rights. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Prisoners suffered physical abuse, stress positions, and sleep deprivation. Images of naked detainees behind barbed wire shocked global opinion. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Legal challenges, e.g. Boumediene Bush, restored habeas rights. Policy debates over enhanced interrogation persist, influencing human rights discourse. 17. Flint water crisis, 2014 to 2016. In a cost-cutting switch, Flint, Michigan's water supply was contaminated with lead and Legionella bacteria, poisoning tens of thousands and causing a public health emergency. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. state-appointed emergency managers prioritized budget cuts over public safety, ignoring engineering and health warnings. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Residents, predominantly low-income and Black, were exposed to neurotoxic lead, while officials failed to replace aging infrastructure or issue timely advisories. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Lawsuits and criminal charges ensued. Ongoing remediation efforts highlight systemic neglect of marginalized communities in environmental policy. 18. Mass incarceration and border detention, 1970s present. Tough on crime policies and immigration enforcement have produced the world's highest incarceration rate and large-scale detention of migrants, often under inhumane conditions. Britannica.com. Britannica.com. Exercise of power. Federal and state laws imposed mandatory minimum sentences and expanded immigration detention authority, disproportionately affecting communities of color and asylum seekers. Britannica.com. Cruelty in practice. Overcrowded prisons, solitary confinement, family separations at the U.S.-Mexico border, and detention centers with inadequate health care illustrate systemic mistreatment. Britannica.com. Aftermath and legacy. Activists call for decarceration, criminal justice reform, and humane migration policies. Small policy shifts contrast with entrenched institutional resistance. Conclusion. From the forcible uprooting of native nations and the horrors of chattel slavery to modern abuses in the name of security and efficiency, these episodes demonstrate how power, absent accountability and ethical constraint, can inflict deep cruelty. Yet each crisis also spurred resistance, legal challenges, social movements, and policy reforms that over time sought to check authority and restore dignity. Reckoning with these dark moments is essential not only to honor victims, but to fortify our democratic institutions against future abuses. Only by confronting the past with honesty can America strive toward a more just and humane future.